This is your reminder that the BBC has yet to address the consistent transphobic leanings in its news coverage, and while the team behind Doctor Who is not connected to this in any way since this is a BBC-owned property, I'm going to keep pointing it out until the problem gets resolved. Links in a pinned comment below if you don't know what I'm talking about. I'll stop saying it when it stops being a problem. Roll for initiative. You son of a... Well, I suppose they had to squeeze in one more or less standard episode of Doctor Who before we hit the first part of the two-part finale, Rogue. And this is honestly basically the exact kind of episode that I was talking about when I did my video talking about how 8 episodes is not enough, because this is the kind of thing that should be filling out the season more, i.e. it is a more or less standard episode. Doctor and companion show up at place and time, alien shenanigans, solve problem, maybe like a little twist on one, maybe 2 aspects to distinguish it from the others, but pretty clear format. This is your standard Doctor Who adventure. And we haven't really had one this season since Space Babies. That one was pretty close to standard. I mean, it may or may not have been to your preference, but format was pretty close to standard, and it's been a lot more unique stuff since then. And while I appreciate the unique stuff, it's nice to have what in many ways feels like a normal Doctor Who episode. I think a lot of people equate normal with boring. That need not be the case. It's just nice to have a baseline, which this, for the most part, feels like it is. Obviously, there are some things that are not standard. I will get to them. Hold your horses. So this is a historically set episode, which for me can be a dicey proposition at times. Thankfully, this avoids doing the main thing that tends to irritate me about historical episodes, which is this does not have a single real-life historical figure. Good. Because while I'm not going to say that can never work, more often than not, when Doctor Who features real-life historical figures, it tends to do a bunch of stuff that annoys me. The most prominent being just the overall leaning into the great man history of just viewing the world, which I find on a good day reductive and unhelpful. But beyond that, there's often, some amount of history rewriting or moral whitewashing in the case of some figures like, say, Winston Churchill. But, we don't have to worry about any of that when we don't have an actual historical figure. It's just a historical setting, which is generally how I prefer my historicals, because that's where you get stuff like Fires of Pompeii, Thin Ice. Heck, I'll even throw Robots of Sherwood in there because, well, Robin Hood's a folklore figure, so that's not quite the same thing. But that does help, and it generally helps me with Doctor Who historicals a lot. So it avoided the one major thing that I'm not going to say always sinks historicals, but frequently does for me. So I want to talk a little bit about the villains in this, the Cholders, partially because they're kind of where we start. While we don't get the full deal of what's going on with them and what they're up to, we get a taste of them first before we get anything else, as one of them is having a, "You have sullied the honor of my sister, sir," argument with somebody, and then realize, "Ooh, you're a bad boy. I think I'd rather like to be you." Kills him and takes his face. So the Cholders they're just a fun kind of villain. Like, as far as the design of their alien look goes, I'm pretty indifferent. Like the makeup's pretty decent, and the transformations are okay. It's a perfectly solid bird person leaning kind of in the owl direction mostly, and that's totally fine. I'm not a huge fan of creating an alien by taking animal and just merging it with a person, usually only in the face. That doesn't usually do much for me, so I don't super like it. It's well executed for what it is, but it's an approach to creating aliens that I just don't really like. It's why I didn't like the fish people from The Doctor's Daughter. It's why I don't really like the cats from New Earth. I think the only time it's really worked for me was Carvanista, and I think that was because it leaned so hard into just being a dog as opposed to like being a person with like dog aspect. No, that's just a dog. It leaned into it so hard, I kind of liked it. But other than that, it's just not an alien design I super enjoy. But what I did like about them is they just enjoy being bad, which I know we're in an age, and Doctor Who doesn't fall into this too often, but it does sometimes. But we are in an age when there is a general sense with a lot of culture, like our villains need to be complicated and layered and nuanced and have tragic backstories and understandable motives. They need to think they are not the villain. They need to think they're the hero of their own story. And like, I'm not going to say it's a bad thing. We get some great stories and great villains out of that. However, there's just a fun to be had with villains who just love to be bad. I'd say a lot of the most iconic villains kind of fall into that category, especially on something like Doctor Who. Most incarnations of the Master, even Missy, who was the one who, quote unquote, went good, loved being bad.
No, I've not turned good.
So I enjoy them for that. And I suppose you could make a comparison a little bit between them and the Family of Blood from the Series 3 two-parter. But I think there is just a more leaning into it here. Like there's a slightly similar general tone thing, but like the performances are pitched a bit differently. The intercharacter dynamics between the various members of this family are different. And more to the point, these people aren't really here for a greater goal. Like they sort of are. They're here, like they say cosplay.
It's cosplay.
They're LARPing is what they are doing. A little bit of a nitpicky thing for me. There's a difference between cosplay and LARP. This is LARP. But regardless, they are just here to have fun, and they have fun being bad. So they're bad in order to have fun. You get things like the Family of Blood, and yes, they certainly enjoy the villainy that they do, but they do still have a goal that does not necessarily need to be executed with this level of villainy, but they're doing it that way because they like to do it that way. But here, like, is there a greater goal? No, not really. Like they mentioned, we'll go to London and I'll become king. And like, yeah, but that's not for anything other than just to do it because it seems fun. Then they could start a bunch of wars and they find that entertaining. And I think, especially for one-off villains in this kind of setting in a more episodic sense, I think that can work quite well. I think they work pretty well here. The performances are as engaging as they need to be. Are these like all-time great villains? No, but especially this season with a number of things really leaning a lot into sort of the nuance of things. And I'd say the one more or less unnuanced villain we've had prior to this was Maestro.
You called.
But most of the other episodes having either no clear villain at all with something like 73 Yards, or like a very complicated villain, like basically it's a faceless corporation that's the villain in something like Boom, or you get these weird sort of, wait, who even is the bad guy in something like Dot and Bubble, or even like Space Babies. Yes, there's a monster, but the Doctor opts to save it. Here it's like, no. Bad guys. Straight up bad guys. It's standard Doctor Who, and there's not a dang thing wrong with that. So, okay. Rogue, played by Jonathan Groff. I actually like this character quite a bit. I like that he has a certain inherent charisma that would make it very easy to compare him to somebody like Jack Harkness. And in fact, I saw more than a few people claiming that they thought before this aired that this was an attempt to recast Jack Harkness. Now, Jack Harkness himself, we may or may not ever see again just because of the controversies that have gone on with John Barrowman. Who knows? But what I like about him is while you could make some comparisons, he's out for money, he's in a historical setting, he kind of initially clashes with the Doctor, but then they kind of ally. Like, yes, you could draw a comparison there, but there's some very key differences in terms of the feel and the performance. Because a big thing for Jack is he's just dashing and just swanning about and charismaing his way through the... Like, if we're going to go a D&D comparison, if this guy is a rogue, then Captain Jack is a bard. He's just swanning through on pure charisma, flirting with everybody, just happy to just glide his way through. All eyes on him. This guy, he's a little bit more subdued. Now, he has a certain amount of charisma, but he's not making use of it. Whether it's he doesn't really know how or he doesn't want to, doesn't super matter. I do kind of like that as a way to have him, yes, in some ways feel a bit like Captain Jack, but also feel distinct as a personality. He's more reserved. He's a bit more, well, grounded, for lack of a way to put it. He's a little bit of a slob in his own ship. He's a nerd. We find out he plays D&D.
Did you get your name from Dungeons and Dragons?
Roll for insight.
You know, there's a lot of little touches around that I rather enjoy. And I think Groff does a good job at giving him enough depth that we can see how he is distinct from somebody like Jack while still filling narratively a very similar role and in the hands of a different actor or being given different direction could have very easily felt like an attempt to replace Jack. And ultimately, I don't think he is that. Okay, I've kind of been dancing around it. The romantic angle between the Doctor and Rogue, because pretty much from the very start of their interactions, as Ruby goes about and, has her interactions with the Duchess and then later on Emily, the Doctor pretty much zeroes in on Rogue and they begin flirt bantering, turning into, trying to figure out who's on what side. Maybe they're enemies, but maybe they don't have to be, and all this other stuff. And, all right, this is where I have to cop to the fact I was probably never going to like this aspect very much. And I don't especially. But I'm in a little bit of a similar camp as to with the Devil's Cord, which was that my big overriding issue with the Devil's Cord is Jinx Monsoon was doing a style of over-the-top, campy, crank to 11 drag style performance that I've seen quite a bit in my time and I don't especially enjoy. So it's not that what Jinx brought was bad, it's that it was something I was disinclined to enjoy in the first place, and overall I didn't. And kind of similarly here, I don't really like romantic subplots in general, like in most things. For me, romance works best in one of two ways. Either where it is the primary focus of a thing, and I know some people will argue, well, it is the primary focus of this episode, and yes, you can argue that, but it's not the primary focus of Doctor Who. It's not what I come to Doctor Who the show for. So while yes, it is arguably the primary focus within this episode, it's not within the greater franchise that I am a fan of. But romance can work if it is more central to the whole thing. Although usually for me, that's usually a better thing in movies. Whereas if you're going to go long form, usually I'm going to be much more inclined to enjoy a relationship that is already established. By and large, most of my issues with romantic subplots is less the idea of romance in and of itself, and more that I just don't particularly enjoy courting. I can enjoy flirty banter in terms of I just like banter, but just that entire aspect of romantic subplots in general I don't like, and I have never really liked in Doctor Who. I don't like when it's done with the companions for the most part, and I generally don't like it the times they've done it with the Doctor, even when it's been a slower burn with somebody like Rose. I don't really like the Doctor as a romantic figure. I mean, yes, maybe romantic in the classical sense, but as a figure of romantic attraction, I have never really enjoyed that as an aspect of Doctor Who as a show or the Doctor as a character. So I was always kind of going to be disinclined to like this. I will say that I have some respect for how far they went with it, especially given that I almost feel like they fake baited some of the audience because especially when the Doctor and Rogue are in the TARDIS and like they're coming right up to each other, and then there's, I forget, like there's an alert on the console or something, and then they move away. That felt almost like it was designed to make people who are just sick of being queer-baited go, oh, of course they're not going to actually do it, only to have them, in fact, kiss later, which that's the kind of audience trolling I actually can kind of get behind and kind of appreciate. But I can also appreciate that this feels like something the show might not do. That's not to say there's never been kissing on Doctor Who. That's not to say that there's never been same gender kissing on Doctor Who. I think there has. There definitely has on Torchwood, but Torchwood was kind of a different beast. No. There definitely has on Doctor Who. Not a ton, and not this overtly romantic, although arguably this is also serving multiple purposes because Rogue is kissing the Doctor in order to take the thing, the trigger, from him, but it is still played up for its romantic value. But this is just an aspect that I don't hate it. It's fine, but it's not what I come to Doctor Who for. And when the Doctor himself gets into these romantic entanglements, it tends to be something I kind of detach from. There's been 2 times that it's more or less worked for me, but even those aren't without caveats. One is the girl in the fireplace, and that one gets a semi-pass, largely because I do at least buy Renette's half of that, because just the nature of her relationship with the Doctor and how long that went on, I can buy her side of it. The Doctor side of it, I don't think they fully overplay it, so it works well enough. And the other being River Song, and that honestly could practically count as a slow boil for how many appearances she has over time. It's just, chronologically very strange. But unfortunately, even not all of the episodes that connect into that story are great. I wish they were. Some of them are, but they aren't all. But those are kind of the only 2 times that have worked for me at all, because one of the things that this does is fall into one of the major reasons why I tend to not like romantic subplots, especially in long-running shows like this, especially as one-offs, which is that it just feels rushed for how much they're banking on it. Honestly, in a lot of ways, Rogue to me feels like he might have originally been designed as the kind of character who's like, that could have been a companion. The kind of character that they only appear once, but you're left thinking, I bet it would have been really interesting if that person had traveled with the Doctor. I think for me, characters like Jackson Lake, or a character like Rita in the God Complex, or if she's your particular cup of tea, Lady Christina D'Souza from is it the Dead Planet or the Planet of the Dead? I can never remember what it is. It's such a generic title. But regardless, like those kinds of characters where it's like, boy, that feels like it could be a companion, but they just end up not being for whatever reason. They turn the Doctor down, or the Doctor decides that he doesn't want to travel, or they die, or whatever. He feels like he might have originally been that kind of character, and then the romance was layered on top of that when they realized that, actually, I think we can get away with this. I think they'll actually let us do this. So let's add that in. And part of the reason I say that is because by the tail end, even beyond my own kind of disinclination towards the Doctor in romantic situations, I actually think it kind of falls apart on its own merits. There's basically one thing where this whole thing kind of falls apart, because it feels like either they are banking on this, they build this up to be more than it is, or they don't treat it like what it is they built it up to. Like, it's failing on one end. Either it's building itself up too much, or it's letting itself down based off the buildup. Here's what I mean by that. We have kind of the slow boil. I say slow. It is kind of fast. It's crammed into a single episode. But within the episode, we kind of have this, let's say, medium boil pace of the romantic inclinations between the Doctor and Rogue. The Doctor, starts to get to know him better and convinces him to not, kill him with this device. Although, pause, and I will come back to that phase in the hologram stuff. Just stick a pin in that. But I'm a little unclear as to why the Doctor showing his previous faces convinces Rogue to not kill him. I guess it's meant to be because Rogue knows what a Time Lord is, but even that I'm not entirely sure on, because I would think showing all the previous faces you've had just confirms that you're a shape shifter. I'm very unclear as to why that worked. But regardless, they go and they do that whole distraction of the dancing together. A quick pause on this. I actually rather like sort of anachronistic music choices as long as they are performed in the style more or less appropriate to the time it's happening. So earlier, and I know there's more than one, but the first one I noticed, and the main one thing off the top of my head, is you hear Billie Eilish's "Bad Guy" being played like by the string quartet or whatever it is, and I love stuff like that. Like one of my favorite aspects of Westworld was these redone songs. Like there's a player piano version of Black Hole Sun that's great. I still listen to that. So I like stuff like that. So the Doctor and Rogue have this tango, which I can't fully verify this, but somebody who I kind of know did contact me through Twitter and point out, actually this particular tango is actually its own existence, and sort of when it was developed and what was going on with it was kind of a revolutionary, pushing against the norm kind of piece. So it seems like some thought went into the use of this particular piece of music. But they have this dance and this whole build up. And again, it plays into what I like about the children, that like they are just here for fun. They're here for the drama. Oddly, so is Ruby, because like she was spying on what to her appeared to be a lover's spat. There are some parallels between Ruby here to LARP Bridgerton, effectively, and the children doing the exact same thing, just doing it a lot more hazardously. The show doesn't really do much with that parallel, but it is there. So they have their dance, and then to up the drama, he proposes and he offers a ring. There's all this buildup, and then there's the kiss. There's the notion that Rogue sacrifices himself, and then there's the last thing he says.
Find me.
And that's the last thing he says before being transported off to another dimension. Like, okay, nitpick. Are we really doing dimension hopping this casually now? Like, I think even if I allow for it being like tied to the supernatural stuff that we know is going on this season, just the notion of Doctor Who casually even mentioning dimension hopping and very easily making something that hops dimensions, that's not a can of worms I think this show benefits from opening. But anyways, when his last words are, "Come find me," it is so bizarre to me that the Doctor doesn't. Ruby kind of floats the idea, and he says, there's infinite dimensions out there. Since when has being in a hopeless situation where he can't possibly succeed ever stopped the Doctor before from at least trying? If you're gonna have him end with that line as a goodbye line, and it didn't strike me as him like kind of cheekily being like, "Come find me even though I know you can't." I didn't get that, but even if I buy that as being the intention of the line delivery, the Doctor is going to hold on to this ring as if like, "Oh, and I will always remember you." Well, try and find him. At least show me that he tried. Give me more reason than just there's too many dimensions. Like, off the top of my head, and again, this is all technobabble, what I'm about to say, but the show is technobabble. Like, is there not some piece of equipment that might give off some signal? Could you not go on the ship and get some kind of tissue sample, just a skin shaving from somewhere up there, and create something that might help you narrow it down and find him and zero in on, like, or at least try to do that, even if it doesn't work? Because that's the thing. I'm not saying this in that like he had to go and find Rogue. I don't need him to find this guy, but it's so weird to me that he doesn't try. And I accept that there's too many dimensions for him to ever succeed. But for him, like, to not even suggest the notion that, like, between Jaunts with Ruby, he's going to try and find this guy. Maybe not do it while Ruby's there because she doesn't have an infinite lifespan and who knows how long this is going to take. But, dude, try. And if you're not going to try, why did the show build this thing up as something this big? It's weird. It's really weird to me that this whole thing gets built up and is the main central core of this episode. And at the end, he's just kind of angsty and sad about it. Do something, man. Like, what the hell? I don't know. That strikes me as being so off. I go back to the Doctor Falls, and granted, like they were talking about a different situation, but just the general notion of the Master saying to the Doctor,
You can't win.
I know, and
because winning is not the point. You do what you can. Like, dude, do something. That was what fully sunk my ability to enjoy this. And it might not have bothered me so much if I was more inclined to enjoy the romantic aspects of Doctor Who episode in general, and for the Doctor in particular. Maybe it wouldn't have bothered me so much. I don't know. I can only speak from the perspective I have. But boy, that really kind of fully sunk it for me. Hey, it's Vera from The Edit. Just a couple of things, because I want people to be clear on this. The first is that I do know that the Doctor is kind of performatively dismissive and like, I have to move on. And he's kind of doing that because A, it's a pattern for him, and B, he's kind of doing it for the sake of Ruby. You know, keeping on a brave face and all that.
It is what it is, so onwards.
So I don't want you to think I'm taking that as read. I get that that's an act, but there's really no indication even outside of that moment directly with Ruby that says to me he's going to try and do anything. And I have also seen some of the discussion and the theories. If you're not interested in theory crafting and are worried about fan speculation potentially being a spoiler, skip ahead to the following time code. But I have, in fact, seen the speculation that says Rogue is, quote unquote, he who waits.
There's only one player I didn't dare face. The one who waits.
Which is supposedly the big bad we're somehow building to. I'm not going to speculate on the accuracy of that. I am just going to put it on record that if the show does that, I'm going to fucking hate it. And not just because the, oh, you abandoned me and now I'm a villain trope is A, overused, and B, almost never works outside of Arcane. And secondly, it would mean they're going to hinge a villain origin on the Doctor, as far as I'm concerned, acting out of character. No! Okay, there we go. Let's get back. I don't think it'd be that hard to fix. You know, alter Jonathan Groff's line to be a more definitive goodbye. That alone would have done a lot to make me not have this issue. Anyways, some other stuff. Another little bit of a nitpick. They have the fake out that maybe Ruby got killed. Now, first of all, like, I wasn't surprised that she wasn't killed, but the show kind of cheated because it does this thing where this particular shoulder, Emily, I think she gets called, she grabs Ruby's hand and then we cut to the hallway and we immediately get the lightning effect and a scream. The implication being that that happened immediately after this shoulder got a hold of Ruby. We just don't know what happened. Now, because we didn't know, I still assumed, oh, she's fine. But I was like, how the hell are they going to cover for that? That happened so fast. Well, they covered it by cheating. They did a sneaky time jump and didn't tell us, because there's a whole stretch of time with like the battle mode activated. And like, I do kind of like the battle mode thing. I like that it was planted earlier. I like it coming back. That's fun. I like it. But like, that's cheating. You tried to make us think she died by having the lightning and the scream happen almost instantly after this thing got a hold of her. When you show us the actual scene, there's like a minute between when this thing gets a hold of her and when anything that would have actually caused the lightning effect and scream would have happened. Like, this doesn't matter. This is a full-on nitpick, but that's cheating. Don't do that. All right. So the other major thing is to talk about the hologram faces that showed up when the Doctor was convincing Rogue to not kill him. And one in particular belonging to an actor by the name of Richard E. Grant. Now, there are arguably two ways that this works, but there's very clearly, at least I think, one that is the intended reading. Because Richard E. Grant has technically played the Doctor twice in what have largely, up to now, be considered non-canonical stories. One being a comedy special, The Curse of the Fatal Death, in which he played one of actually quite a few incarnations of the Doctor. There's sort of a joke towards the tail end of a rapid fire of, at the time, decently sized and notable actors playing the Doctor for really brief periods, and he was one of those. But I think more importantly, he played what is now generally referred to as the Schalke Doctor. So before the show was properly revived, and after the TV movie happened, so that was Paul McGann being the Eighth Doctor, there was a web series called Scream of the Schalke. It was, I believe, 6 parts of anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, and it featured this incarnation of the Doctor voiced by Richard E. Grant. And prior to the official revitalization of the show in 2005, headed up by Russell T Davies and starring Christopher Eccleston, this was intended to be the canonical 9th Doctor. And he's never really gotten a look in or a reference until this. Now, one of the things I noticed that they did was they kind of jumbled up the order. These are not showing up in regeneration order. So while he shows up in there, we cannot take his placement as an indicator of where he now fits in the timeline. And exactly how canon he should be considered is still a matter of debate. Because whenever you are talking about Doctor Who, when you're talking about anything that isn't the show proper, canon kind of only works one way, which is that the external media, meaning novels, comic books, audiobooks, and this animated series, they try very hard to adhere to the canon of the show, but the show does not generally bother to adhere to or even acknowledge the canon of all those other things. So it's kind of a big deal whenever it does. So that's why an episode like Night of the Doctor was a very big deal, because there is a line from Paul McGann's Eighth Doctor where he mentions some audio-specific companions.
Charlie, Carey's, Lucy, Tamsin, Molly. Friends, companions I've known, I salute you.
This is why it was actually kind of a big deal in the Christmas special, The Next Doctor. There was a quick image of Paul McGann as the Eighth Doctor because it wasn't entirely clear if his Doctor was still considered canon or not, because the TV movie was not part of the standard run of the show. So these things getting confirmed in some way or another is rather interesting. Now, the question then becomes, is this a fun reference, like those names being dropped by Paul McGann in Night of the Doctor? Or is this meant to indicate a possible return of the character? It's hard to tell with the sort of hologram-looking effects. It does look like they're using an image of Richard E. Grant more or less now, not an aged-down image or anything of that nature. But then again, given the animated nature of the original short, trying to nail down exactly how old that version was supposed to look is hard to tell. They kind of picked an image of him that he could play if they decide to bring him in. I'm not going to assume that'll be the case, though. Until we get further evidence, I'm going to assume that this is a fun reference to go like, yeah, that happened. When in the timeline? Who the hell even knows? But yeah, that happened. I need to rewatch Scream of the Schalke. I've been thinking about doing a video on that thing for ages. I guess I kind of have to now. No idea when the heck I'll be putting that out. Oh, this is a busy month. Anyways, that was kind of a cheeky bit of fun, and I do appreciate it. I don't necessarily assume it's going to mean anything. I guarantee you that those more into lore and theory crafting are going to have a field day with that from now until the end of frickin' time. But I'm not that kind of viewer. I'm not that kind of fan. So those of you who are, go forth and have a ball. For me, it's just kind of a fun little reference. So I think that's overall kind of it. This was a perfectly solid standard episode of Doctor Who. It was fun. It had a really good guest performer. Had a serviceable villains. It botches its final moments for me, again, either because they built this thing up to be more than they're actually acting like it is, or they built it up enough but then didn't give it the weight after the fact that it deserved for what they built up. either way, like that I do think is a legitimate issue. But for the most part, this is a fun and enjoyable light episode of Doctor Who. This was a good time. And for all of my disinclination towards the romantic angle, like there are some good moments of connection between the Doctor and Rogue. The Doctor just recognizing loss.
Who did you lose?
What?
You lost someone.
That's a good way for him to connect with people in general and with this character in particular. So I don't want you to think that I'm here like, ugh, the romance was bad. Like, the romance wasn't for me. And I think they botched it at the ending. But yeah, I think that's gonna be where I wrap it up. Rogue, what did you think about this? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living, even if you can't help me out that way. Like, share, subscribe. They all help me out, but don't worry too much about it. What I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. Happy Pride. You are the council, and I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Goddess Elida, Oliver B., Melissa Pedersen, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Jean Foray, Ulrich Bogdan, Loki Eris, Linda Walters, Jen, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Renabulax the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Kasparov, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Toku Bluhuvian, Pal Rabajagal, and Mara G. If you'd like to hear your name in the credits or even just see them, there are rewards on the Patreon, so maybe check those out.